Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of One More Thing Before I Go, the podcast that celebrates the extraordinary lives of everyday people. I'm your host, Anthony Anderson, and we've been taking a break from our interviews with people in our lives to talk a little bit about the Enneagram. If you missed our first couple of episodes, this is a personality typing tool that's used, and it's come into prominency in the last couple of years, so we decided to tackle it a little bit. And at first glance, it may seem like these two ideas of hearing people's stories and talking about personality traits may not necessarily go hand in hand, but in my mind, they're perfectly fit together. So many of us have a lot of emotional baggage, trauma that we've carried with us, things that have happened in our past that we don't really know how to talk about because we haven't really figured out how to deal with them. And so they've turned into things that have morphed our personality, things that have forced us to take on particular roles, wear particular masks that we don't necessarily know how to deal with, don't know how to handle, and don't know how to change. Something like the Enneagram is a really good tool for helping us determine what those things are, to figure out the things in our past that have become driving motivations, where we said at some point, I don't want this to happen again, therefore I will live like this. Or I liked when I got this response from people in my life, and so I will always behave in this manner. That right there is a huge step in understanding our story. And if we're going to tell our story, we have to first understand it. So that's how the things tie together. We've had 2 weeks so far. And if you missed both of those, I really encourage you to step back and listen to the first week. It was a primer. It walked you through the 9 types very, very quickly. And then the second week was a lot of more technical things. How do we know that the Enneagram is accurate? What usefulness does it have for us? And a couple other specific questions like that. This week, the hope is to dive a little bit deeper, not necessarily into each type, but talking about ways that each type may be different. We're going to talk about something called wings. We're going to talk about integration and disintegration, or ways that we step into health and ways that we deal with stress. And then we'll also talk a little bit about something called instinctual subtypes. So if you're tracking with me so far, great. You've probably heard some of these things before. If not, know that it's a good way for us to get these 9 numbers to 18 if you're looking at wings, and 27 if you're looking at subtypes. And so if you're blending those together, you're looking at somewhere around 54 different types, even within all those 9 subsets. So it's a way of saying, okay, I see 3 ones right in front of me. Why are they not all the same? It's similar to how Myers-Briggs takes your standard 4 boxes and turns them into 16. For some people, figuring out their wing is extremely important. And for some people, figuring out what their subtypes are, that was extremely important in even identifying what number they are. They couldn't figure it out, and they finally heard a slight description of one of the subtypes within a number, and they said, oh, that makes more sense. Like most things, your mileage may vary. We'll talk about the ups and downs of utilizing all those things as we go. I think that's a good lead-in. Hopefully you haven't gotten completely lost. And if you are, hang tight. We'll talk about things in more detail and explain the depth and the nuances of all these as we go. I hope you're ready. I know I am. Here we go. This episode of One More Thing Before I Go is sponsored by Anchor.fm. When I first had the idea of making the show, my primary obstacle was deciding which platform to use for my recording, hosting, and distribution. Anchor made it so easy because they do all 3 things and much, much more. It's free. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will even distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more platforms. You can make money from your podcast, whether you have 2 listeners or 2,000. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. All you have to do is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. I'm joined by a special guest this week. Can you give us your name?
Maleah Anderson.
And how old are you, Maleah Anderson?
10.
10. Maleah is my daughter. And one of the questions we're going to talk about today was one that she asked. So I thought that I would bring her on to the show. We can have a little conversation and she can ask her question in person. So Maleah, what was your question?
Is it possible to have 2 wings?
So the first thing we have to try to figure out is, what are wings, right? Because if people don't really know what wings are, then trying to answer your question might not help them, right? Yeah. So let me ask you, what do you know about wings?
They're the number next to your number, and you kind of have some of the things that number does.
Yeah, it's almost like a way to flavor your particular type. Do you prefer salt and pepper, or do you prefer maybe something more spicy, right? And so there's different ways, but you're preparing the same basic meal, right? Or the numbers may answer, are you left-handed or right-handed? But then once we figure out you're left-handed or right-handed, then we still can dig in a little bit deeper and say, okay, you write left-handed, Maleah, but do you write in cursive or do you write printing, right? So it's a way to kind of subdivide a little bit. And it helps us figure out why 2 different people with the same numbers aren't completely the same, right? Mm-hmm. So what's your number?
I'm a 4.
You're a 4. So according to the way you explained it, which was accurate, what would the 2 options for your wings be?
Either a 3 or a 5.
A 3 or a 5. So as a 4, you sit in which of the triads? Do you remember?
Heart.
The heart triad. Good. And so are any of the 3 or the 5, are they in the heart triad?
The 3.
The 3 is. And then the 5 is in which triad?
Mind,
the head, right? Head triad. So the 3 is someone who is really focused on achieving and ambition, right? And success. Does that sound like you at all?
No.
No, not really. The 5 is very similar to the 4 and usually is withdrawn. They like learning, they like observing, they like analyzing things, trying to figure stuff out. But because they're in the head triad, then they not only are dealing with shame in the way that the 4 would, but they also have a little bit of fear and anxiety built in too. Does that sound a little bit more like you?
Yes.
So in the example for you, you would be a 4 with a 5 wing, right? Mm-hmm. Now your question is it possible to have 2 wings? And I know when you first asked it, you weren't really sure, can I have a wing that's somewhere else on the circle? But we talked about that a little bit and you realized, what's the answer to that? No. Just like an airplane has to have wings that are attached to it, right? Your number has wings that are on either side of the number. So you can't be a 4 with a 7 wing. That just doesn't make any sense, right? Because it's not attached to you. But there are people like me, I'm a 5. There are people who hover between both directions. And so for me as a 5, sometimes I lean really heavily toward your number, the 4. In that we're similar. You're a 4 with a 5 wing, and I can sometimes be a 5 with a 4 wing. But I can also lean the opposite direction and lean into a lot of the 6 tendencies and plan for worst case scenarios and have a little bit more anxiety and fear over what's going on. And so sometimes I can, you know this, when when you're about to do something dangerous or you're about to do something that might not pan out well, I'll say something about, well, if you do that, then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then you're going to fall and bust your head open, right?
Yeah.
That's me kind of stepping into the 6. That's probably not what's going to happen, but I tell you the worst case scenario in hopes that you stop whatever it is that you're going to do, right? But there are other aspects of me that lean into the creativity and the melancholy and some of the sadness that the 4s really like, right? So there are some people who don't necessarily lean heavily in one direction or the other, and we call those a bi-wing. So you have both wings, and you can step into one or the other as the situation requires. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there are some people who talk about how your wings can maybe change. Maybe when you were younger, you bought into one particular wing, and then as you've matured and you've grown, you've kind of started leaning in the other direction. To some degree, that's kind of a way of growing, right? Because we've talked about, and we have here on the show too, that you're not really your number, right?
Yeah.
That's just the thing that we kind of hide behind. So it's, in some ways, it's a way of saying that we're growing. If you say, I used to have this wing, and I don't know that I have this wing anymore, I'm kind of leaning in this other direction, or I can kind of embrace both of them equally. Does that make sense? Because really, we're not supposed to be at the edge of the circle. Where do we really want to be?
The middle.
In the middle, because we're able to step into the 1 if we need to, or we can be more fun-loving like a 7 if we have the opportunity. And so we can choose to respond in the way that we need to or want to for the situation instead of having a default response. Does that make sense? So technically, it's not possible to have 2 wings in the way that you asked it. But just like most of the questions that you ask me here at home, what is the actual answer?
It depends.
It depends. The girls hear this all the time, and they roll their eyes when they ask a question. But the answer to almost every question in life is really, it depends. And so in this case, technically, you could have a bi-wing. You could lean in both directions depending on the situation, but you're never going to lean toward a number that you're not already touching. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So that's a really basic idea on wings, right? And we could get into a really long conversation about what each wing looks like for each type, but there's tons of books written about that type of thing. That's not what we're here for. We had other questions, though. One in particular that said, hey, could you talk a little bit about subtypes? Because for some people, that really helps them land on a number that they otherwise maybe were struggling to try to figure out. So do you know anything about subtypes? You've been pretty good so far.
I just know that there's 3 subtypes.
There's 3 subtypes. Good. And so when we shorthand it, people get really crazy on writing out all their Enneagram stuff. So for you, so far, if you were to write it, you would write a 4W5. That's a 4 with 5 wing, right? But then people go even crazier. And so then you'll sometimes see 4W5SO or SP, or the third one is SX. Do you know what any of those are? All right. One is social. And social is the type of person who your natural instinct, which is what these are. These subtypes are your instinctive variants. That's the official technical word. Do you know what instinct is?
What you automatically do.
Good. Instinct is what you automatically do. So automatically, we tend to lean toward one of these 3 areas. So for some people, it's social. They're really focused on building communities and developing groups of interactions and making sure to take care of people inside a group. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's social. The next one is SP, which is self-preservation. Do you know what self-preservation is?
Not really.
Do you know what preservation is? preserving something?
Like saving it?
Saving it, keeping it safe, right? So self-preservation would be keeping yourself safe. So self-preservation are focused on making sure that their needs are met. Do I have enough food? Do I have enough sleep? Do I have enough shelter and security? And so self-preservation tend to be the group that wants to isolate the most, because they'll pull away, and I got to take care of myself first. And if I have enough left in the tank, then I can go and be social. So SPs, self-preservation, will more than likely be really, really introverted. Okay. So you could have a person that's a 7 who's naturally very extroverted, right? Do you know anybody that's a 7 in your life?
My sister.
Your sister. But is your sister a really big extrovert? No. So it's possible your sister is not a social 7, but she may be a self-preservation 7, where her primary focus on making sure her needs are met first. Does that mean that she's not a 7 because she's not an extrovert? No, because you know her. She's still pursuing fun. She wants to make sure that she avoids anything that she doesn't like. And so she'll get super distracted. And we were laughing last night. I don't think you were there, but she was holding the baby at small group last night. And then she heard that there was ice cream, and she put the baby down on her feet and started running away. And then the baby toppled over because Callista forgot that the baby was just learning how to stand and didn't know how to walk. But Callista got so distracted that she set the baby down, and the baby was wobbling and then fell over. And so we were laughing at her that was really the epitome of a 7. So she's definitely a 7, but she's a pretty introverted 7, right? Yeah. So she might be a self-preservation. Her instinct is to make sure to take care of herself first, right? And then the last one is we have SO, SP, and what did I say the last one was? Do you know? SX. So that one's a weird word. That one's sexual. But it's not as weird as it sounds. It's really a one-to-one, like an intimate relationship. It's not, I want to take care of everybody and I want to build a community. It's, I want to build a close relationship with you. The person that is sitting across the table from me, or the person that's sitting on the couch with me. And so they might have 1 or 2 people that their instinct is to be drawn really close to those 1 or 2 people, and not necessarily the rest of society. And so they have really close connections to a couple people. They're not so isolated that they want to be completely alone, right? And so that's the sexual, because it's like an intimate thing. It's just a couple of us, maybe just one other person in my entire life that I'm really focused on. So those are the variants. And for somebody like me, they're okay. They're helpful to some degree, but they didn't really do anything for me. Maybe because 5s are the subtypes are so similar, it's not really that different. But I've heard from other people that they really had no idea what number they were, and they thought, oh, maybe there's another number somebody hasn't come up with yet, because I must be that one. And then it turns out that they're like what we talked about with sister, that they're kind of an outlier, like a weird subtype that doesn't necessarily fit the mold. So like a 7, that's an introvert. Or this person that I'm thinking of is actually a 4, who's normally very withdrawn, right? And reserved and held back, but they like to be kind of the focal point of attention a lot of times. And they didn't understand, maybe I'm a 7. Can I be a 7 with a 4 wing? Kind of like what you were talking about before. And so it wasn't until they realized, oh, you can be a 4 that's a social 4, and that looks a lot different. And so they were able to finally land on it. Yes, I am actually a 4. And so for some people, having these subtypes is super, super important, because it really helps you say, oh, okay, there is kind of classification for me. And I'm not this weird person that there's only one of me in the entire world, and I'm so weird and unique, even though that's what a 4 wants to hear, right?
Yeah.
I'm so weird and unique that they don't even have a number for me. But it turns out, okay, well, if we can break it down into all of these different groupings, then, maybe we fit into one. So let's do some quick math here. If we have 9 types and there's 3 subtypes, then how many total subtypes are there?
18.
Let's try again. If there's 9...
27.
27. Okay, I was going to say, man, you're in 5th grade now. We might have to send you back to 3rd grade for this one. Yeah, 27. Good. Now, I'm going to really test you. If we have 27 subtypes, but then you can also be either one wing or another wing, then how many types can you actually possibly be? The wheels are turning. 27 times 2.
54.
54. You're really missing math club this year, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. 54. So when we say there's 9 types, once we start to break things down, we realize, there's kind of sort of 54 different types, right? And so the 4 in you says, I can be a lot more unique, right? There's not just 9. I can fall and I can be a 4 with a 5 wing with the self-preservation type. And so I'm one of 54 instead of one of 9. Right? Is that kind of how you feel?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Good. All right. So we've got instinctual variance, we've got wings. So we have lots of ways that we kind of branch out. So technically, if you have only one wing, we'll not count if you're a bi-wing. But if you have only one wing and you have whatever instinctual variant, how many numbers have you connected with so far? You're what number?
4.
You're a 4, so that's one number. And then you have what wing?
5.
So that's 2 numbers. So far, you're connected to 2 numbers, right?
Yeah.
What would you say if I told you that you were really connected to 2 more numbers?
I knew that.
You knew that. Yeah, we had lots of conversations about this, huh? Can you tell people how you're connected to 2 different numbers?
When you're healthy and not stressed, then you sometimes will behave like another number.
Or at least the good aspects, the good qualities of a particular number. So if you're looking on a picture of the Enneagram, you may see lines in the middle of the circle that there's arrows drawn in a particular direction. And then obviously you could trace the arrows backwards against the direction that the arrow is pointing, right? So we call the one that you just described a line of what? Do you know?
No.
Is it integration or disintegration?
Integration.
Integration. You're integrating, you're adapting, you're growing. This is really when you're growing because you're healthy. Then you're stepping into new things and taking on the good traits of a number. So if you're looking at the chart, then you're actually going against an arrow. So the arrow that points towards your number, if you trace that back for you as a 4, do you know what that number is?
A 1.
A 1. So as a 4, you're naturally going to focus on usually yourself, right? Yeah. Pretty introspective, and it's very much nobody can judge me. Nobody really can see like the way that I see the world, that type of thing. What are some of the good traits of the 1 when you're being healthy that you tend to also add into your personality?
I'm determined to get things done.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What else?
I like to help other people do the stuff correctly.
Yeah. So you're not just focused now on being an individual and being unique and creative. You start to actually focus on getting things done, and you start to focus on making sure things are done properly, done the way that they're supposed to be done, and not just done the way that you would like to do them. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good thing. So that's your integration. What's the other line?
2.
So when you're unhealthy, when you're experiencing a lot of stress, maybe you don't even realize it, then you start to take on some of the negative traits of a 2. What does that look like in your life?
I don't want to talk to people and I get clingy.
Yeah, so not wanting to talk to people is still probably a negative trait of the 4. You're going to get pretty quiet and reserved. But yeah, a 4 who usually is completely fine being by themselves most of the time because they like to live in their own world. And sometimes 4s don't even notice the people around them, right? But when you start to adopt some of the negative traits of a 2, you suddenly start to need people. You need to be around people. You need to be noticed. You need people to pay attention to you, which isn't a natural thing for you as a 4, right?
Yeah.
So you start to get clingy. You start to develop kind of a codependency thing. Maybe if I do this, maybe if I act out, then people will pay attention to me, right? Have you ever seen that pop up here at home?
Yes.
Yes. Can you think of an example? No. Sometimes when we've maybe had to spend some time talking to your sister and getting on her about stuff that she's, not getting her homework done, that type of stuff, then suddenly when we're all done, then out comes Maleah from the room and she kind of is really quiet and doesn't really say anything, but then she just kind of sits on the couch and like snuggles up really close and doesn't want anybody to leave her alone, right? And so to some degree, everybody needs good snuggles, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes I have to ask you, are you being clingy? Is it because you need attention? And why is it that you need attention? Because usually you go off in your room and you read for hours at a time, or you sit on the couch and read for hours at a time, and you don't even notice the people around you and what's going on, right? But then suddenly there are times where you feel like maybe somebody else has been getting attention, and so now I need attention too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one way that might happen. You also sometimes, if your sister gets in trouble for something and we say, Calista, stop doing that, then we turn around and suddenly Maleah is doing the very thing that we told Calista to stop doing. Because again, you just wanted some attention, and sometimes negative attention is still attention, right?
I don't do that anymore.
Not as much, but it still happens. So that's integration and disintegration. So where the arrow points from your number is the way that you disintegrate. When you're falling apart, which is what disintegration is, right? When you're falling apart and the world is crashing down around you, you're experiencing lots of stress, then you start to take on these negative traits. Now, for the most part, we think about all those things as being bad, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes what I've learned is the world that we live in, if it doesn't make sense to us and we're experiencing a lot of stress in the way that we normally operate, our line of disintegration may actually provide us a way out of all that stress. For me, as a 5, my disintegration goes to a 7. And so I spend a lot of time in my head processing and analyzing and processing and overanalyzing all the time. And so sometimes a way of getting out of my own head is to do the 7 thing and just escape. Just go and do something active, something to get me out of my own brain. So I stop thinking about whatever I'm thinking about and actually do something with my day, right? So that's a good way, even though I'm operating out of stress, that's a good way to bring myself back. You can do the same thing. Sometimes you might be feeling lonely as a 4, and as a 4, you feel things really deeply, right?
Yeah.
So it might be good for you to step into, I just need to go and snuggle with mommy and daddy for a little bit and I'll feel better, right? But you need to go into it and approach it as this is a way for me to right the ship and become balanced again, instead of I'm going to step into this negative side of things. So we can do the disintegration and do it in a healthy way that it helps us kind of rebalance. But if we pursue it in the negative sense, then it's only going to make things worse. You can be sitting there on the couch and snuggling, and if we have to get up maybe to go get a drink or whatever, then you start to whine like we're leaving you and abandoning you for the rest of your life, right? That's a negative way. But if you're sitting there on the couch and you're thinking, oh, this is really what I need, I feel a lot better, now I can become a lot more like myself, then you're actually taking those negative disintegration and you're reorienting yourself, and you're actually turning it into a way to grow, right? Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool. So we've talked about wings, and we've talked about variance, your subtypes, and we've talked about integration, disintegration. Is there any of that doesn't make any sense to you, or you have a question about any of it?
No.
No? You got it all figured out. You can teach a class on this, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll take you up on that next time. We'll see how it goes. How's that sound?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay, now you're a little hesitant. Okay. So hopefully at this point we've been able to answer one of the other questions that's come up, which is, are the relationships between the types adjacent or connected in the usual diagram any more significant than the relationships between any two other types? So when you hear that question, what's the answer, Miss Teacher?
Yes.
Yes. Why is it more significant or more important, the numbers that your number is touching?
Because they can affect how you behave.
Right. And we would call those our wings, right?
Yeah.
Those are our wings. Good. And then on the diagram, we have not only our wing, but our number has 2 lines connected to it, one pointing away and one pointing to it. And are those 2 numbers that we're connected to with the lines, are those more important to us than the other numbers?
Yes.
Yes. And we call those what? Lines of
integration and disintegration.
Integration and disintegration. So we have our number, we have our wing, and we have our integration and disintegration. So technically, of the 9 numbers, how many numbers are we actually connected to?
4.
4, right? So that's almost half of them. In some way, we're connected to almost half of them. Now, let me blow your mind. Are you ready for this? There are some people who say that you don't have 1 number, you have 3 numbers. What do you have to say about that?
You technically have all 9 numbers.
You should. That's true. If you're healthy and you're completely the person that God has created you to be and God is wanting you to step into, if you're wanting to be like Jesus, then you're embodying all the numbers. That's a great answer. But the people who talk about this, they call this your tritype. And they actually say that because we are not one of the triads, we're all of the triads in various facets, that we have a mind and a heart and a body, that it makes sense that we have one of the 3 types in the mind and the heart and the body. And so they call it a tritype. So for me, I could potentially be a 5-8-4 as my tritype. And so my heart type is a 4, but it's the one I tap into the least, so it's the last one that I list. My primary number is a 5, and it's the one that I tap into the most, so it goes at the beginning. And then after the head, then I tend to do things before I feel things, and so my 8 is the one that I fit in the middle. And so if I were to, I think I've done the tritype thing once, and that's what I came out to be, was like a 5-8-4 or something like that. Whatever it is, it's really, really weird. And some people really buy into it. But here's the thing I have with it. If you're already 4 numbers, connected to 4 different numbers, you're not 4 numbers, right? If you're already 4 numbers, and then you have this tritype thing, but your tritypes don't happen to actually be any of the numbers that you're integrating or disintegrating or stressing to, then you're technically adding how many more numbers to your list?
3.
Well, one of them is already your number. So you're not adding 3, you're adding
2
to your
4.
Which means that for some people, they could suddenly be connected to 6 different numbers of the 9 numbers. And at that point, how helpful is this tool?
Not very.
Not very. Because I don't know about you, but when I just boil down the 5 and I see all of the things that the 5 has going for them and all the things that the 5 really needs to work on, that's probably enough for a lifetime for me to work on that and try to stop being so 5. But if I have 6 of the types that I'm suddenly figuring out all the good sides and bad sides to, and how do I sin in this way, and how do I miss the mark in this way, and when I'm acting in health and when I'm acting in stress, but I have 6 of these numbers to try to focus on, it's a little crazy and a little scary. And most people, when they hear about that, they would just kind of take one look around and say, this isn't for me, right? This is too hard. This is too scary. This is not something that I can figure out. Maybe somebody who has like a PhD in psychology could figure it out, but not me. And so it's kind of weird. So there are people on Reddit and there are people that have whole books and websites and stuff that talk about all of this. The problem is, and I'm saying this as somebody who likes to study and likes to read and likes to just learn and sometimes likes to do all that so I don't have to do anything about it, right? That's the typical 5.
Yeah.
And you know that because you kind of feel that a little bit too with your 5 wing, right? If I can keep on learning about it, then I can maybe feel it as a 4, but not have to do anything about it, right? But to some degree, I think it gets a little bit too crazy and a little too in your head. So I can figure out all the technical stuff and I can spout it off and I sound really cool at parties, or at least at psychology parties where they talk about tritypes and social variance, instinctive variance, which I'm not sure what type of parties those are. But I don't know as a 5 whether I'd really like to go to that because it's something I have interest in, or whether my social awkwardness and anxiety would keep me from going to the party because it's a party. But anyway, I just don't see how useful that is. So you can figure out your tritype if you want, but big number one thing would be figure out your number. Start working on that, right?
Yeah.
What do you think the next important thing is if you're not sure about your number, which of the 3 things do you think would be most helpful in trying to figure out your number? Subtypes. Because you might figure out that you have a particular variant that's atypical, that's not normal, and so it stands out and makes your particular number look and act a lot like a different number, but just with a different motivation, right? So that's important. If you feel like you've got your number down, then you can maybe learn about your subtypes, but it may not be as important as figuring out which of the other 2 options. Which do you think is the next most important? Your wings or your lines?
Lines.
I would say lines also, because I need to know when I start to behave in a way that's not quite within my type, Am I doing that because I'm healthy and because I'm growing, or am I doing that because I'm responding to stressors around me, right? So I need to figure out sometimes, am I moving in a good direction or am I moving in a bad direction, right? And then I would say, figure out your wing, because that helps you figure out your flavor, right? Am I leaning toward this particular direction or this particular direction? It'll be helpful in helping you kind of figure out why you as a 4 or me as a 5, we don't always behave 100% like the descriptions in the books might play out, right? Because I also do this or I also do that. But I feel like people put a lot of weight in wings and try to figure out what's your type. And then as soon as you figure out your type, well, you don't really know your type until you know your wing. I would say of all of those, figuring out your wing is maybe the least important of all the stuff that we talked about today. What do you think?
I feel like it's still important to know your wing, but it's probably the least important.
Yeah. So if you know your number, then you can already start moving toward growing, right? And improving and getting better and breaking out of all of your negative stuff. And so if you're growing, then you need to probably know what it looks like for your particular type to grow, which is why I think the lines are the next important step, because I need to know what it's going to look like when I'm growing and improving, right? But yeah, then figuring out your wing, I think over time is extremely helpful because it helps to explain a little bit more of the why that I do what I'm doing. Yeah, so I wouldn't avoid it. I wouldn't ignore it, but I would go in that order. Figure out your number. If you're still having trouble figuring out your number, then look at the subtypes and try to figure out if that helps you land on a number, and then work on your lines, integration, disintegration, and then start to figure out what your wing is. Sound like a plan?
Mm-hmm.
So for you, with this conversation, what would you say your whole line, if you were to write it out, would be?
I don't know my subtype.
Take a guess, but start with your number.
4.
With a
5 wing.
5 wing. And do you think that you're social, self-preservation, or 1-to-1? Your instinct. What are you drawn to the most?
Self-preservation.
Possibly. That's pretty likely. So you're a 4 wing, 5 self-preservation. And we figured that out in a nice half-hour conversation, right? We didn't quite figure that out. We knew most of that already, right?
Yeah.
So how was it? You were a little nervous when you sat down, and then when we stopped and took a little break, you said, "Oh, this is fun," right?
Yeah.
Can we do more? Yeah. So maybe when we get out of the Enneagram thing, then you might be able to share your one more thing with people. What do you think about that?
Yes.
Yes. You just have to figure out what your one more thing is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, give me a high five. Good job. This is way more fun talking to somebody than staring at my computer and talking to nothing. So thanks for the conversation.
You are welcome.
To everybody else at home, hope you enjoyed the episode. Until next time, be good to yourself and be good to
others.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. If you like what you heard, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you do your listening. You can even interact with me directly if you go to anchor.fm/One More Thing Podcast. That's the number 1 More Thing Podcast. There you can click on a link to send a voice message. That's a great way to give feedback or let me know if you too would like to be a guest on the show. It's that easy. Special thanks goes out to BigFish_music for providing our theme music and transitions. If you like what you heard, go check him out on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks again for listening to One More Thing Before I Go. Until next time, be good to yourself and be good to others.